In the shadow of mighty battleships and aircraft carriers, smaller warships often carried the heaviest burden of the Second World War. They did not duel enemy fleets in set-piece battles, nor did they launch great strikes across oceans. Their mission was quieter but just as vital, to protect the merchant convoys that kept Britain alive. Among these escorts, one name stood out: HMS Black Swan. She was steady, dependable, and formidable. And alongside her sisters, she was a cornerstone of the Royal Navy's fight against the U-boat menace. Black Swan was laid down in 1938 at the yards of Yarrow Shipbuilders in Scottstown. She was the first of her class, and so she gave her name to the Black Swan-class sloops. These were designed as multi-role escorts, larger than corvettes and with heavier armament than earlier sloops. At 1,250 tons standard and 1,850 tons deep load, she was compact, but she carried an impressive punch. Her main armament consisted of 6-inch, dual-purpose guns in twin turrets, fore and aft. Unlike many escort ships, these were true high-angle weapons, capable of engaging both aircraft and surface targets. Added to this were Oerlikons, pom-poms, and, as the war progressed, radar-directed fire control that made her particularly deadly against the Luftwaffe. For anti-submarine warfare, she was equipped with depth-charge throwers and racks, and later, the ahead-throwing Hedgehog mortar, a terrifying weapon for U-boats. Her top speed was only about 19 knots, far slower than destroyers. But speed was not the point. Endurance, seaworthiness, and firepower were what mattered. And in those categories, Black Swan was a winner. When she was launched in July 1939, Europe was sliding into crisis. Within weeks, Germany invaded Poland, and the Royal Navy once again prepared for a war of convoys and commerce raiding. From the beginning, Black Swan was thrown into escort work in the North Sea and Atlantic. It was unglamorous, grinding service. Convoys plodded across grey seas, often in appalling weather, and the escorts kept constant watch for submarines and aircraft. The U-boat menace was already deadly, and in 1940 it grew worse. Merchant ships burned on the horizon, victims of torpedoes launched under cover of night. But wherever Black Swan sailed, she offered reassurance. Her crew drilled endlessly in gunnery, sonar sweeps, and depth-charge attacks, becoming hardened professionals in a matter of months. Black Swan's 4-inch guns soon proved their worth. In convoy after convoy, she was called upon not only to hunt U-boats but also to defend against air attack. German bombers and torpedo planes targeted convoys relentlessly, particularly in coastal waters. Here, her heavy dual-purpose armament gave her an edge. She could throw up a wall of shells, forcing bombers to break off or crash in flames. Escort crews took grim satisfaction in seeing their gunnery rewarded with a kill, though often there was no time to celebrate before the next threat appeared. By 1941 and 1942, Black Swan was escorting convoys into the Arctic, carrying desperately needed supplies to the Soviet Union. The Arctic convoys were among the most dangerous of the war, with pack ice, towering seas, Luftwaffe patrols from Norway, and ever-present U-boats. Many ships never came back from those frozen routes. But Black Swan endured. She braved the gales, fought off bombers, and dropped depth charges into the black depths, forcing U-boats to break off their attacks. If there was one chapter that made Black Swan truly famous, it was her role in Captain Frederick Walker, or Johnny Walker's second escort group. Walker was the Royal Navy's most successful U-boat hunter. He was brilliant, tireless, and utterly dedicated to destroying the submarine menace. His escort group became legendary for its aggression and innovation, hunting wolf packs rather than waiting passively for them to attack. Black Swan joined his group in 1943, alongside other sloops like Starling, Kite, Wild Goose, and Woodpecker. These were the core of Walker's deadly pack. Together, they became the bane of the U-boat arm. In operation after operation, Walker's group would detect U-boats and then hound them mercilessly, circling like wolves, dropping depth charges, and keeping them submerged until they ran out of air or batteries. Then, the Hedgehog mortar would be brought into play, firing ahead of the ship and raining explosive charges onto the target. In just a few months, the second escort group accounted for dozens of U-boats. Black Swan's crew were part of this extraordinary run of victories, a record unmatched by any other group in the war. By 1944, the Allies were preparing for their greatest gamble, the invasion of Normandy. For Operation Overlord, every available escort was needed to guard the armada of ships crossing the Channel. U-boats and fast German attack craft posed a grave threat. Black Swan was there in June 1944, part of the massive naval screen. Her task was to protect the troopships and landing craft from submarine attack, and to keep the supply lines open as the beachhead was expanded. She was not the most visible ship in that armada, but her role was critical. Without escorts like her, the invasion fleet might have been torn apart. As the war entered its last phase, Black Swan and her sisters continued the relentless hunt. The German Navy introduced new, faster U-boats, but Allied escorts had grown even more skilled. Radar, sonar, and air patrols combined to crush the U-boat threat. By 1945, the once mighty U-boat arm was shattered. Hundreds had been sunk, and thousands of German sailors lost. The work of ships like Black Swan was central to that victory. When peace came, many wartime ships were scrapped almost immediately. But Black Swan had more years left in her. She continued to serve into the post-war era, a reminder of the old days of convoy escort. Her sisters also lived on, and one in particular would become famous in her own right. HMS Amethyst, another Black Swan-class sloop, would in 1949 find herself trapped on the Yangtze River in China during the Civil War. Attacked by communist artillery, she fought her way through in what became known as the Yangtze Incident. It was one of the last great stories of the Royal Navy before the jet and missile age, and it immortalized the class to which Black Swan belonged. The Black Swan-class sloops proved to be one of the most successful escort designs of the war. They combined seaworthiness, endurance, and unusually heavy armament for their size. They served not just in the Atlantic but in the Mediterranean, the Arctic, and the Far East. Many ships of the class distinguished themselves. HMS Starling, under Johnny Walker, was one of the most famous U-boat killers of the war. HMS Woodpecker sank multiple submarines before being lost herself. HMS Amethyst carried the story of the class into the Cold War era. And at the head of them all was HMS Black Swan. She gave her name to the class, set the standard for their service, and shared in the great victories of Walker's escort group. She and her sisters guarded convoys across stormy seas, hunted submarines with relentless skill, and supported the great invasions that brought victory. Together, they wrote a chapter of naval history often overlooked, but absolutely central to Allied success. When the story of the Battle of the Atlantic is told, the Black Swan-class sloops stand as quiet heroes. And at their heart is HMS Black Swan, the ship that gave the class its name, and helped turn the tide in one of history's most desperate struggles. After the war, most Black Swan-class sloops were retired or scrapped, but a few found new lives abroad. 3 of them were sold to the newly reformed West German Navy, and the names they received carried a wry sense of historical humor. Former Royal Navy ships now sailed under names like Hipper, Scharnhorst, and Graf Spee, once symbols of German naval power that had struck fear into British sailors, now reborn as training vessels for a very different Germany. It was a subtle, ironic twist of history. The hunters had become lessons in history themselves, teaching a new generation under the shadow of names that once haunted the seas.